Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and I'm going to be giving an overview of your exam or somewhat of a briefing. But before I do that, I just want to say that the exam on Tuesday would be approximately 50 questions, 40 to 50 questions. You'll have 75 minutes to complete the multiple choice exam. You will need your calculator. I will have a number of questions on there, maybe 10 or so, 10 or 12 questions on there where you will be required to calculate some currency conversions, pretty much like you did on the quiz. And so if you understood the quiz, if you got the concepts of the conversions, then you got it. It is not that difficult. It's just a matter of logic that you have to use in order to know where the funds are flowing. So let's talk about the quiz. And I'm going to run through all of the questions, and I'm going to do this rather quickly since the class did well on the exam, or well on the quiz. Hopefully you'll do well on the exam. But the quiz that you took on Thursday was a take-home. So what happened was you had a worksheet, you worked on the problems on that sheet, and then last week you went on Canvas and you were given the same questions, and all you had to do was transfer your answers to the questions on Canvas. And you all did very well. Now, I am hopeful that for the exam, you all will understand the problems. If you understand the problems in the quiz, you'll get the exam. You'll be fine with the problems on the exam. If you didn't do the problems and you basically got the answers from your classmates, or if you just wrote the answers down and didn't really understand them, then this exam will be a bit problematic. You're going to have to understand the concepts of how these conversions are made in currency. And then, of course, you'll also have to understand about monetary policy. I may talk a bit about fiscal and monetary policies, the differences between those, inflation, interest rates, and the role that they play in terms of this international monetary system. But before we do that, let's go over the quiz. The quiz, we fared very well in the quiz. And I will go over the quiz right now. These were in the form of problems on a worksheet where you had to actually write in. But for the multiple choice, I had to convert them such that you would get them in Canvas format. Now, by the way, you can give exams where you write in the answers, but of course, this is a lot more precise. It doesn't leave much to interpretation. Generally, you get the answers right or not. So this question here requires that you use a currency chart. Now, I gave the class a currency chart and I posted it. And so we look at this one. Using the currency chart, how many euros can you get for $1 US? We pull up the currency chart here and we're looking for euros. It says, how many euros can you get for $1 US? Now on this chart, this column here represents all the values of the different countries in terms of $1. So these are $1 equivalents. For example, 73.351162 is the same as this amount. So that's the Singaporean dollar, 1.357006. Those two values are the same. Those two values are the same because they're equal to $1. And if they're both equal to $1, then they're equal to each other. So on this particular chart, you have the dollar row and you're looking for the euro. Just pretty simple, right? So that is the amount of euros you get for $1. It is 0.846484 would have been the answer to number 1. Number 2, same idea. You take a look at the chart, but there's a couple of other steps that you have to do with this one. Because of the fact you have to find the exchange rate between the pound and the yen. Now that information isn't on this chart. So what do? You use the dollar row, this dollar row here, and you're looking for the exchange rate. 1 pound equals how many yen? So that's the exchange rate we have to find. Couple of different steps. So we look at the British pound. Now the British pound would be here. We use that $1 equivalent. The yen would be here. So we have two figures here, and those two figures are equal to each other. So if they're equal to each other, you have to get in your foreign exchange equations, one of the currencies has to be a 1. In this case, you're trying to find out how much 1 British pound equals in yen. So one of the things you do is you use those $2 amounts and you try to get the equation where you have 1 on one side. So whenever you want to cancel out and get 1 on one side, you do what? You divide both sides by that number, and then that number cancels out on one side of the equal sign, and then the other equal sign is a division. So as you can see in this second problem, you can see how it's broken down. So in the final analysis, 1 British pound equals 137.6166 yen. How do we get that? Well, we look at the fact that the British pound is going to be the base currency. It's going to be the one with the 1. All currency equations have a 1. And if it doesn't have a 1, you need to make it a 1. So that way it's easier to deal with the exchange rate. So here's the solution. You see that I'm using the dollar, which is in bold, as the vehicle currency. I got the two equivalents on each side of the dollar. So they must be equal to each other. To get 1 on each side, I divide both sides by 0.765337, leaving a pound is equal to 137.6166 yen. If a Polish citizen came to the US, how much US currency would they get for 1 zloty? Well, that's again a matter of using the chart, but it's the inverse of what we had been doing before. We go down, we look at the Polish zloty, if we can find it. So we see the Polish zloty here. Now there are a couple of different things here. You have the dollar column that we just talked about, which tells you how many zlotys you can get for $1, which is 3.773231, right? So the other column must be the inverse of the dollar. It must be how much 1 zloty will get you in the United States. Again, these are inversely related, which would be the answer for that question. So you will get just a little bit more than a quarter, which is not very much to spend here. So for this one, you have also to do an extra calculation. You have to find out This Italian citizen is taking 5,000 euros, and she needs to know how many pounds would that be. Now, obviously, before you convert any currency, you need an exchange rate. And all we have are the figures on that chart. And those are dollar denominated. So we use that column for the dollar equivalents. And once we find out how much 1 euro is equal to, we will find out how much 5,000 are equal to. So then we go to the solution, and the answer is 4,520.6820. So that is exactly how many pounds this Italian citizen can get for her euro. And the actual calculation is below. It's the same thing. You use a dollar as the vehicle. You've got two different figures on each side. Those figures are equal to each other, as you can see here. Then you have the idea of getting one because you want to make an equation. And in currency equations, there's always a 1 on one side. So you divide both sides by 0.846484. And then once you do that, your euro is equal to 0.9041, etc. All of these digits going all the way out. So that's the number of pounds that you have for 1 euro. And if that is equal to 1 euro, then how much does that equal of 5,000 euro? It's just a matter of multiplication. So that's the fourth one. And some of the others are pretty straightforward. If the Japanese yen strengthens, then products become more expensive for U.S. importers. If you watch the opening segment, you will have figured out that the traders were able to sell the pound for slightly more than what they purchased it for. Okay, so for number 7, this is a similar problem. There's a quote for the South African rand. If a South African visited the U.S., how many U.S. dollars would they get for 1 rand? Well, I'll tell you, it won't be a lot. And if you looked at the chart, the result would be somewhat humorous. Not so much for the American, but for the South African. If you look on this chart, I'll just pull it on here again. You will see for yourself that if you came to the U.S. as a South African, your 1 rand would be equal to this amount, 0.060567. And again, not much you're going to be able to do unless you have a lot of rand or come over here with a lot of rand. This one requires some review of material that you may have had perhaps in high school or grammar school or middle school, whatever your structure was. But this required you to do a little bit of percentage work. And a similar scenario, you might ask, if I see a blouse on the rack or a shirt on the rack, and it goes from $20 to $16, what is the percentage change of that shirt? How much of a discount am I getting on that sale? It's a similar type of question. So here is asking if the exchange rate changes from $1 to 3 Angolan kwanzas to $1 for 5 Angolan kwanzas. What is the percentage change in the U.S. currency? Well, there's a very well-known way to figure that out by using the formula new minus old over old. And thus, you get the final increase or a measurement of 66% increase. If your currency, from an American standpoint, you have a 66% increase in the value of your money because for some reason the dollar got stronger and the kwanza got weaker. Here's a very interesting example here. Somebody makes a mistake. And I always get on my students because when I get their quizzes, the take-home quiz you just did is usually written out, and I'm able to see your work. But one of the things that I tell students is don't put your symbols down carelessly. Like there's a symbol for the euro you saw on the previous slide. There's a symbol for the pound, for the yen, for the Canadian dollar, the US dollar, the Nigerian naira. All of these have these symbols. And if you don't know the symbol, you just write it out and everybody will know. Or there are 3-letter acronyms that are also associated with currencies. But in this question here, somebody makes a mistake of writing down 100,000 yen instead of 100,000 US dollars. How big of a mistake is that, you wonder? Well, first of all, you look at what they put down. It's 100,000 yen. And they were supposed to put down $100,000. So you're looking at the difference between these two sets of currencies. The easiest way to do it would be to look at the yen as if it was in dollars. So if it's 100-to-1 exchange rate and you have 100,000 yen, then that is $1,000. So instead, they put the equivalent of $1,000 in the accounting ledger, in the books, when they were supposed to put down 100,000. So then what is the difference? The difference is 99,000. It was a $99,000 mistake. And I hope none of you make a mistake like that because that will most likely be your last day at that company. You have to be very cautious about those types of mistakes. Here's a practical one. You're at the exchange desk in France. You want to exchange 200 US for the equivalent amount of euros, and the clerk gives you back 132 euro. You do some quick calculation. You look at the board. You see the exchange rate. And then you come up with the realization that the clerk gave you 2 less euros. How do you figure that? Well, you have an exchange rate and you're trying to find out how much $200 is in euro. If you know how much $1 is in euro, you know how much 200 are in euro. So that's just a multiple. So the multiplication is 200 times 0.67. or 134. And so that 134 is what you were to receive, but you only received 132. Thus, you receive 2 euros less than expected. So for this question, you have a situation that's practical, but this also may be counterintuitive. And I noticed some of you on the quiz missed this one. It's perfectly okay as long as you get it on the exam. But if we look at this in November, you have a situation where you have an exchange rate between the US dollar and Jamaican dollar. November, that rate changed. So we want to know what happened. What happened between the two currencies? What was the end result? So we look at the first quote. If you're Jamaican and you come to the United States and you say you want to exchange your Jamaican dollars for US, and you have 100 and you want to know how much $1 is worth. You want to know what the exchange rate is. So they say that is 130 Jamaican to $1. So if you get a dollar, if you exchange for a dollar, you're giving up 130 Jamaican. A month later, you come to the same clerk, you ask the same question, and they say a dollar is equal to 132 Jamaican. So now you have to pay two more than you did before, which means that your currency has depreciated. And these figures are inversely related because you have to give up more. The Jamaican has to give up more, and the American gets more. This was just a matter of you going on the sheet and looking up all these currencies and finding the correct amount. This last one is also one of those that requires some thinking. This is a situation where you have a traveler who's looking to buy a plane ticket, and he has $700 to get this plane ticket from Chicago to Paris. And maybe he's a British student going to school in Chicago, but he wants to buy this Air France flight for the vacation, and he notices two quotes, both of them with pounds as the base currency. And by looking at this, he asks, can I really buy this ticket? And he does some calculations, and what do we find? We find that, indeed, Majid is not able to buy this ticket. And why? Now, depending on how the euro or the dollar moves will determine whether this equation is going to be feasible for Majid. But if you look at, you could have done this a couple of different ways. You could have converted US dollars to pounds because you have that exchange rate. 1 pound equals $1.52. You already have that. And so you would make the conversion there, which is 460.5263 pounds. And then convert those pounds to euros through the same method. So at the bottom, you could have used the cross rate method. So in the final analysis, Majid cannot afford that plane ticket because it requires 590 euros, where he only has 534 euros and some change. So not quite enough.